こんにちは。家庭料理人の谷川綱義です。本日はですね、日本で子供から大人まで大好きなオムライスというものを作っていきたいと思います。これがカットした食材になります。要するに中身ですね。白いご飯、鶏肉、パプリカ、玉ねぎ、ニンニク、マッシュルームになります。熱したフライパンにオイルをひいて、その中にガーリック、ニンニクを入れていきます。そしたらですね、ニンニクがこのぐらいの色になったら、今度は鶏肉を入れていきます。じゃあ鶏肉の次は玉ねぎ、オニオンを入れていきます。そして玉ねぎを入れて炒まったら、今度最後こちらの食材を全て入れて、そしたら合わさったらですね、少しここで塩コショウ、下味を少しつけます。で、合わせて炒まった後に今度ご飯を入れていきます。今回こちらの野菜を使ってますが、冷凍のミックスベジタブルでも可能です。このようにパラパラの状態になったら、ケチャップで味付けをしていきます。で、炒まった野菜、そしてケチャップを入れた状態のものがこちらになります。そしたらですね、こちらができた具材なんですけど、今度それを包むオムレツのネタを作っていきたいと思います。卵を4つ。これは卵を4つも割ったら、まず溶いていきます。溶いたところに少しのお塩と白胡椒、牛乳と生クリームを入れることによってふわっとしたオムレツができます。こちらの熱したフライパンにバターを入れていきます。で、なじませます。なじんだら卵を入れていきます。このように周りから中にスクランブルをかけるようなイメージで作っていきます。中にご飯を入れていきます。そしたら包んでいきます。最後にですね、ケチャップをつけて、こちらで完成になります。
Hey everybody, this is Rob Buscher from the Tadaima virtual pilgrimage, and today I'm going to be showing you how to do an izakaya-style meal featuring Saba Shioyaki as well as shishito peppers and cucumber pickles. So here I have actually a Saba or a mackerel that has already been cut and flayed like this. Ideally, you want to get one like this because it's meant specifically for this dish. But obviously, if you don't have a Japanese grocery store or you want to just go to a fishmonger, you can definitely do this with a mackerel that's cut this way by the fishmonger, or you can do it yourself. Obviously, this is the very easiest way to do it. So I'm going to start here. It's very simple, and I think one of the things about cooking this dish, it seems intimidating because I think cooking fish in general can be a little hard at first, but this is honestly one of the easiest recipes that you could possibly do. So we're going to start here by just kind of opening up the fish. I have a glass oven-safe baking dish here. You could use a baking tray. If you did, then I would just recommend putting some tin foil or something so that you don't dirty the tray. And it's really simple here. What you're going to do, we're going to use some cooking sake and just put a little bit on it to kind of coat the fish. You want to get this whole area of the fillet kind of coated evenly with the sake. Don't spill too much all at once. You don't really need to soak it. I mean, just as long as there's a little bit that touches the fish, that should be enough to do what we're trying to do here. I use Gekkeikan, but you can really use any brand of sake. So what we're going to do, once the fish is soaking for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to actually pat it dry with a paper cloth, which I'll show you in just a second. And then we're going to be sprinkling some kosher salt. I'm using margarita salt, but really any kosher salt will do fine in this case. All right, so now that the fish has been soaking for about 10 minutes, we're going to take a paper towel and just pat it dry. The idea of putting the sake on here, again, just a very light coating, and what it does is kind of takes out a little bit of that fishy flavor. I mean, obviously it's fish, you want it to taste like that, but some of the unpleasant fishy odor is actually being taken away by that sake. So once it's patted dry, we're going to go ahead and take our coarse ground salt and just spread a little bit over the fish. Try to coat it evenly. Probably no more than a pinch or two of salt, depending on how big a pinch you use. And basically, that's all there is to it. What we're going to do now is the oven has been preheated to 400 degrees, and we're just going to put it in the center tray in the middle of the oven for 20 minutes exactly. Make sure that the skin side is down so that that way you get a little bit more of a crisp edge on the skin. All right, so now that the saba is in the oven, we have about 20 minutes to do the side dishes. And the ones that I had mentioned here today, we're going to be cooking some shishito peppers. If you're not familiar with them, these are mild green peppers that usually have a little bit of spice. Occasionally you get a really spicy one, but for the most part, they're mild. You can eat them a lot of different ways. But basically what we're going to be doing is just sauteing them with a little bit of vegetable oil and sprinkling them with some more salt. We'll serve it with a garlic ponzu aioli sauce. So these are already washed, and what we're going to do here, I use a cast iron pan because I find that the char gets a little bit better on these. You want to turn it up to about a medium-high heat. We're going to use just a tiny bit of cooking oil. If you want to come over here so we can see it a little bit better. Basically, no more than a teaspoon or so of oil. And as the pan gets hot, just kind of move it around so that the oil coats evenly. We'll wait for that to heat up. By now, our skillet has heated up, and you can hear the peppers starting to sizzle a little bit. Just want to move them around a little bit to make sure that they're being cooked evenly. You can see the sides of the peppers are starting to get a little char on them. You want that same look evenly across them if possible. We're going to use our kosher salt again here, generously on the peppers. While the peppers are cooking, we're going to start our next side dish, which is namazuke, or a fresh pickled cucumber. I prefer using the small Persian or Japanese seedless cucumbers. This works just fine with an English style or another kind of cucumber. But I'm going to be using a mandolin. You can do this in a variety of ways. You can hand chop it, but this dish is best served with very thinly sliced cucumber. So if you have one of these, it makes the whole process a lot easier. Basically just go back and forth on the mandolin, and you can see these are almost paper thin, the cucumber slices. So we're just gonna go ahead and slice through both of these cucumbers. All right, so now we have the entire 2 cucumbers have been sliced in the mandolin. Just gonna put them here into a ramekin or whatever other dish that you want to use. And then we're going to use just a little bit of sesame oil, literally less than half a teaspoon, just enough to kind of barely coat the top layer of these. And along with that, we're going to use some rice vinegar. And again, just enough to kind of coat the cucumbers here. If you'd like to, you can actually add some fresh ground sesame seeds to this. I think the sesame oil is fine by itself, but the fresh ground sesame works as a nice garnish to it as well. But the other key ingredient here is, again, we're going to use a coarse ground kosher salt and just kind of sprinkle it generously across the top of the cucumbers. And just use your hand to kind of gently massage the cucumber slices to make sure that they're evenly coated in the rice vinegar, the sesame oil, and the salt. You can see that the skin has kind of blistered off the peppers, and it's about evenly cooked. So this looks ready to plate. The last steps that we have to do for both of the dishes here is just the garnish. Most of the time that you have Saba Shioyaki in the izakaya, then you probably see the finely grated daikon radish. We're going to be doing that here. So here we have a daikon that's been cleaned and the outside skin has been peeled off. And here's your typical daikon grater. If you don't have one like this, that's totally fine. You just need like the rough end of a cheese grater, can work just fine. But basically, I use the grater at an angle. It takes a little bit of practice to use one of these efficiently, but you want to use the edge of the daikon and sort of rotate it as the daikon begins to lose its shape as you're grating it down. And then you'll get a more productive grate with each strike of the grater. And you can kind of see, here's the daikon when it's grated. We're just gonna repeat that until we've got enough daikon to serve as garnish. All right, so now we're going to make the ponzu aioli for the shishito peppers. And again, this is another really simple thing to do. And it's sort of my take on the age-old shoyu and mayonnaise, like standard Japanese-American condiment. But to kind of spice it up a little bit, just use some garlic powder. Not too much, just enough to kind of coat the bottom of a shoyu dish. Then I use Kewpie mayo because I think that the flavor is a little bit better, and I also like the creamy texture compared to Hellmann's or one of the other American mayos. So yeah, just kind of fill it up about halfway. And then again, instead of using shoyu, I like to use ponzu because the citrus in that gives it a nice little kick. And yeah, just enough to kind of coat it. We're going to then just mix it gently together. so that the mao and the ponzu have mixed completely, and stirring to the bottom of the dish to make sure that that garlic powder gets evenly dispersed throughout it. And that's basically the consistency and the color that you want. So our timer just went off. It's been 20 minutes since we put the saba into the oven. And here we go. It's a completed Saba Shioyaki. Basically, 20 minutes should be fine for a fish of this size. They're fairly standard. And, what we're going to do now at this point is just kind of cut down the middle. For a fish like this that's already been filleted, it's quite easy to separate the fish. And then what we're going to do is also kind of cut off the head here, unless you want to serve it with the head, of course. Once the fish has been separated in half, you just want to use some tongs to gently hold it and cut in half like this. And then we're going to place the fish onto the serving plate like so. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'm about to enjoy my meal. Itadakimasu. And what is a good izakaya meal without some shochu? So, kanpai.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for week 3 of the Sunday Supper for Tadaima. I'm Mia. I'm an organizer for Sunday Supper and the book club portions. And you all probably know Rob for curating our film festival, but he's also the board chair of the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival and president of the Philadelphia chapter of the JACL. So welcome, Rob. And I want to
Thanks for having me, Mia.
Yeah, of course. So thank you again also to the Embassy of Japan to the United States for allowing us to share their Omurice video with Chef Tanikawa. And Let's Cook with the Embassy Chef is an ongoing series that they're doing, so there will be many more recipes to come. So please be sure to follow the Embassy on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to keep an eye on those recipes. And they're also listed below for you all. And yeah, so I have some questions for you, Rob, and I think that we'll have some more questions coming in here from the comment section. But first, I just wanted to ask, do you often cook with margarita salt, and what inspired that? I never would have thought about that.
The funny thing is, I think creativity in the kitchen is born out of necessity, and I ran out of the coarse ground salt that I normally use, and realized actually that margarita salt is essentially the same salt that I was using before. So no reason to not cook something.
Yeah, I just thought that was funny when I first saw the video, but it's good to keep in mind. So Rob, will you just start telling us a little bit about your family background, and if that inspired growing up with any Japanese food in the house or any maybe typical Japanese American cuisine?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we didn't eat that much Japanese food growing up. I mean, where my family grew up in rural suburban Connecticut, I mean, we didn't even have a sushi bar in our town until like 2000. So just to kind of give you a sense, fairly removed, like we had to drive maybe an hour to get to an Asian grocery store. And, obviously we had dishes that were Japanese or certainly Japanese American. I mean, what vegetable could be served without the classic mayo shoyu condiment? But, I think for the most part, it was really simple things like onigiri. We had, rice balls growing up. We also had other things like ochazuke. My mom would do, and especially in the winter, just the rice made from the day before with some furikake and hot tea on top of it. Otherwise, very simple things like stir fries. And anytime that we visited our relatives, of course, on the West Coast, that was a whole other story. And my Issei Hibachan lived until 2006, so got to eat a fair amount of her cooking when we would go visit her.
Wow, that's, I think, pretty remarkable to have that experience with, the Issei and the Yonsei interacting that much. So that's awesome. I can kind of identify with a lot of that. I grew up here in Idaho, and it was, I think, pretty exciting when we first got our sushi restaurant in town. But I'm Shinike, so I have a little bit different of a connection there. So I actually don't really know anything about typical Japanese American cuisine. That's all very new to me when I hear some of these things being discussed at pilgrimages. But certainly izakaya food I can relate to. So I think you told me that a lot of this izakaya food was inspired from your time living in Japan. So what was, when did you live in Japan, and what was kind of the food culture for you there when you were like cooking on your own versus eating out socially with friends? What did that look like?
So I moved to Japan when I was 19 years old, 3 years into college. And this was maybe a year after my hibachan had passed away. And I think all of us in our family were trying to figure out, like, are we still Japanese? Our one direct link to Japan is now gone. What does that make us? And certainly growing up in the East Coast without a real Japanese American community, we always kind of thought of ourselves as Japanese. And obviously, going to live and spend time in Japan, that was made abundantly clear that we were not Japanese either, right? We're Japanese American. But the food culture was really exciting to me. And I think one of the first food memories that I have, growing up, we would go visit my hibachan in Ogden, Utah, just outside of Salt Lake. And she would be cooking all kinds of incredible Japanese food. And it would have that sweet smell of mirin after it's been cooked, and sort of mixed in with that incense that you get from the butsudan. So, like, not at the same time, obviously, but the house would have those two odors sort of infused together. And doing a homestay in Kyoto when I was studying Japanese during the summer of 2008, that was the same smell that I encountered. And it was just such like an incredible nostalgic feeling that immediately brought me back to my hibachan's kitchen. And just thinking about, food in general, I think when we look at how immigrant cultures keep themselves intact, it's largely through food, culture, and language. And as yonsei, right? Like, I didn't have the language in my life. Many sansei don't even have the language until I moved to Japan, obviously. But then the other thing is not having grown up with access to Japanese groceries. So much of my Japanese cooking knowledge came from self-exploration during college. And, I had the good fortune of living overseas in London the first few years of college, and encountered a lot of different Japanese restaurants, and was able to buy groceries and cook Japanese food for the first time in my life. But then, moving to Japan, although it wasn't the purpose, it's not like I was going there to learn how to cook these things, but eating Japanese food on a daily basis, shopping at exclusively Japanese grocery stores, obviously it kind of lends itself to exploration, especially as a student on a budget. I've always enjoyed eating good food. And, as a student, you don't have the budget to go out to a restaurant every day. So that's how I taught myself how to cook. It's like, I want to keep eating this good food. I better learn how to cook some of these dishes that I enjoy eating. And particularly at the izakaya, all of the dishes that they make are easy to make. They're very quick. They don't require a lot of ingredients, and it's fairly inexpensive. So it's a very simple way to cook good food for yourself at home.
Yeah, I also can identify with that a lot. I studied abroad in Japan when I was 20, and very limited budget. And I remember just having things on hand at home. It was so simple. Whatever I would cook, I'd always have like tofu, eggs, rice, miso soup, like stuff for yakisoba, just really, really basics. But you can eat such healthy, nourishing food for quite inexpensively at restaurants and izakayas. I think one food memory I have socially in Japan was we would always do takoyaki parties. And so I think that's a fun experience to share with people. And it was so fun because we would have the most like inventive ingredients in the takoyaki. Like I think the recipe that I mastered as my favorite combination was like hot dog pieces, mochi and cheese and kimchi in takoyaki, which like you would never find probably on the street in Japan or here. So I think it's fun to see how that can all evolve. Looks like we have a question from Clement. He says, hey Rob, are there any fish indigenous to the Delaware River that you've incorporated into your Japanese American diet, or vegetables for that matter? What are the best local vegetables you've integrated into your East Coast diet?
That's a good question, and thanks, Clement, for that. Thinking about the history of pollution in the Delaware River Valley area, I generally eat sea fish, so I can't necessarily say that there's anything in my diet from that. But one of the things that I do eat a lot of, my father-in-law is a Portuguese immigrant, and he's also a chef. And I've spent a lot of time eating his cooking and cooking with him in the kitchen. So sardines, I mean, they're incredible. If you can't get your hands on a saba, the same way that you can simply prepare any fish for a Japanese meal works wonderfully with the sardine. And actually sardines are eaten in Japan, but they're just a slightly different variety. So definitely that is the most eaten fish in our household outside of, saba. In terms of vegetables, thankfully, we do have a lot of local farms. Philadelphia is not far from Lancaster County, where the Amish are. And not sure how many of you know this, but there's also a very large Vietnamese refugee community that was settled there after the Vietnam War. So they've been integrating Asian vegetables into their growing practices for the last 35 years. And, for the most part, we can get anything that you have on the West Coast. It's just a matter of going to the right grocery stores.
One of the things I appreciated about your recipes, like you said, they're very simple, at least the izakaya food. Especially, I think you've just developed what works for you. I think one of the hard things about recipes that are handed down through the family is like the imprecision in them all. Like for instance, when I make gyoza, I don't know like the amounts of ingredients you put in because my mom taught me to do it by smell. Like make sure you can smell the ginger and the garlic and the soy sauce. So I wondered if you have any experience like that in your family, or have you just kind of started to master everything from trial and error?
Thankfully, my mother spent a good amount of time writing down recipes from her grandmother, my hibachan. And so we actually have written recipes for most of the dishes that she made. That being said, again, being in a kitchen in another place in the world, you kind of have to make do with what you have. One of the things that I adapted very quickly on, the teriyaki chicken recipe that I cook, which may be featured in a later video in this series. Actually, I substitute part of the mirin for fresh squeezed orange juice. Ooh. And that just came about because I was literally out of mirin. Like I had maybe a quarter cup, I usually use half a cup. And, I had a couple ripe oranges laying around and I thought, this might just work. And it was good enough that, I've continued to do it. So
that sounds good. Do you guys garden at all? I grew shishitos last year for the first time and they were so easy. Like I have no gardening experience. I just had them in a pot. So this year I doubled the amount of plants I have and they're coming in pretty strong. I'm getting excited for the next few weeks.
Yeah, so we live in the city and South Philly, it's hard to come by a plot with land. But we do have a fire escape and my wife gardens there. So we have grown shishito. Actually, we ate some last week. That wasn't the one that I used in the video, but we have that fresh shishito that's growing. We have Japanese cucumbers. We have eggplants and cherry tomatoes, which I frequently use for these kinds of dishes.
Okay. So what are the other, we'll kind of give a preview, the other videos that you've provided for future Sunday suppers? Can you tell us what those are?
Yeah. So in the last week or so, I cook Japanese food probably 2 or 3 times a week, if not more. And knowing that this was going on, I just started recording stuff that's in the kitchen. And it's been kind of interesting because when you cook regularly and you're by yourself in the kitchen, you don't talk about it out loud. And it's kind of interesting finding the words for something that you do by muscle memory and having to explain that for people on a video. So bear with me if I'm not as eloquent in some of these videos. That being said, I am excited to share these recipes. They've been a work of labor, a labor of love, really, because for me, again, so much of our culture was tied up in this culture of cooking and Japanese food. So to be able to share that with other people who might not necessarily have access to the most authentic Japanese groceries, hopefully people can take those things and kind of explore and expand on their own. But we'll be doing videos on teriyaki chicken. We have another video that looks at nasu dangaku, another izakaya standard fare of like a grilled eggplant with a miso glaze. And the other video that I made was for the Toki highball.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to joining along for that one. So do you have access to any izakayas around you? I love to hit a lot of the izakayas if I'm in New York, but I don't know how that scene is in Philly.
Yeah, I've actually spent a lot of time with Madam Saito, who's one of Philadelphia's original Japanese restaurateurs. We did have a little bit of like a Nisei restaurant scene here in the 1950s and 60s, but a lot of those folks kind of aged out of the restaurant business. And by the 80s, of course, we had a lot of Japanese from Japan coming, Shin-Nikkei, coming to open restaurants where there were Japanese companies. And we have a fair amount of Japanese pharmaceutical companies and also the Subaru of Cherry Hills right across the river from us. Madam Saito came from Tokyo, and her specialty is sushi, but a lot of the dishes that she cooks at her Tokyo Head House restaurant are also izakaya. And then a new favorite of mine, Jesse Ito, the son of Masaru Ito, who for many years had Fuji Mountain sushi restaurant in Center City, Philadelphia. Jesse recently went out on his own to open up izakaya concept, Royal Izakaya. Definitely a great place to be. But again, it's one of those things where I would only go to a place like that on a special occasion, knowing how to cook a lot of these dishes myself.
Yeah, that's helpful. If anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat. Again, Fujitani says he's also heard for substituting maple syrup instead of meat for some things.
I imagine that would be good, but only if you're okay with the maple flavor, because maple syrup does have a pretty distinct flavor. But then again, nothing holding you back in terms of the creativity.
I actually have a friend that does her Thanksgiving turkey using orange juice and maple syrup, equal parts. So
I had an opportunity when I was living in Chinatown, Philadelphia, to actually work in a professional kitchen for a little bit. And that was an interesting experience because I was working under Master Chef Joseph Poon, who's the first Chinese-American Master Chef. And he specializes in fusion cooking. So he was doing Hong Kong Cantonese style, like Southern Chinese food, but definitely very interesting techniques. He had studied at the Culinary Institute of America, was integrating French style ingredients as well as cooking techniques into these traditional Cantonese dishes. And it was just great to be able to work with him and learn so much in terms of, how to be not just a creative chef, but a chef of necessity, and kind of look at your pantry or your fridge and use whichever ingredients that you have to make a solid meal.
I think that I've been doing a lot of that during COVID times, trying to use what I've got on hand, reaching to the far corners of the cupboards. So how has, the pandemic impacted your cooking for better or worse?
I would say it's definitely for the better, because I had a pretty stocked pantry before the pandemic started. And it wasn't long before we realized that actually
our Japanese grocery store, Maido, which is a little bit outside of the city, it's never crowded. And it certainly was less crowded then with the pandemic. So we were able to go in and get these groceries that we love to cook with. And actually with less exposure than if we went to a Whole Foods or, you know, a Trader Joe's. So the other thing is just the time, right? And it's like, it's amazing. These days I'm cooking like 3 meals a day at home. And that's just not something that I would be able to do without the quarantine.
Yeah, I had a similar experience early on when people were panic buying and everyone was talking about how difficult it was to find produce on hand at the grocery stores. And I did the same thing. I went to the Asian market and I got a lot of staples that would last for a while, but I got like a huge bag of baby bok choy for like $3 and I had it for like a month. I could not get rid of this bok choy. It just felt like auto refilling in the refrigerator. But you know, got to experience with cooking bok choy in different ways than I normally would think of. So, all right, we've got a question from Ryan. What's the next thing you're planning on cooking, not necessarily as part of Sunday supper? So what do you have planned for dinner maybe tonight?
Well, actually, I am making chicken teriyaki as we speak. It's already in the oven, so expecting to have a nice dinner after this. I also repeated the fresh pickle recipe that I showed in the video, and we'll be having a side salad with that. But yeah, I mean, I do a lot of other cooking styles. My dad is, you know, a big European mutt in terms of Spanish, Czech, German, English, Irish. His mother was really a pretty classic, like American cook, but her father, who was from Spain, an immigrant, he was a chef. And so a couple of the recipes that he made regularly, like paella or like chile con carne, like these are things that have kind of been taught to my father, and then he's taught these things to me. So do a lot of these kinds of hybrid cookings, as well as just, you know, peasant cooking. And I think, you know, looking at the history of American immigration, there's all these incredible one-pot meals that we can make. Although this is not really the weather for it currently. I guess you know, in the summer, I spend most of my time out at the grill.
I think a good hallmark of you know, a chef that knows their way around the kitchen is really being able to figure out the multitasking. Like, it was surprising how you prepared 3 different items in like the span of the 20 minutes that the fish was cooking. So you've really got all of your timing down. So very impressive that you've got your chicken cooking as we do this. Okay, it seems like we've got a little bit of a debate in the comment section now. So what is your rating of the Philadelphia roll versus the California roll versus the Seattle roll? Which I don't know. I don't know what the Seattle roll is.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not really sure what the Seattle roll is. So sorry, Seattle folks. But I can honestly say I prefer the California roll to the Philadelphia roll any day. It is worth mentioning, though, Madame Saito, the restaurateur I was just talking about, she's the person who invented the Philadelphia roll back in the 80s, when literally there were no other sushi restaurants around. The mayor of Philadelphia asked her, can you make a signature roll for the city of Philadelphia? And she thought about it. And at the time, the only customers of hers that weren't Japanese Americans or Shin-Nikkei were the Jewish community. So she thought lox and bagels, and she actually used smoked salmon and cream cheese. And if you do it like that, I think it's a far superior roll to what is served at a lot of the other restaurants.
Does anyone put capers in theirs?
I believe that people might, but I've never tried it like that.
Yeah, I just tried a Philly roll for the first time quite recently, like in the last couple of years. And the first thing I thought was, it's like eating a bagel. So I thought that was a little bit strange. I don't know about cream cheese and sushi.
Did we figure out what a Seattle roll is?
Oh, Ryan says cucumber, avocado, salmon, and cream cheese. That sounds like a Philly roll to me.
I guess with the cucumber and avocado added.
A little more veg. What do you think about, I know you're I think your family and your future family will be quite mixed as well. So what do you think some of those hallmark recipes that you'll try to hand down from, both your parents' sides?
Well, I really do all the cooking in our house, so I try to integrate as many dishes as I can that are Portuguese because, I want, like, we're expecting a child and I want them to be able to eat that side of their heritage as well. Plus, I mean, Portuguese food is just good food. It's really good cooking. And for folks who haven't tried it before, there are actually a lot of similarities with Japanese cooking in the sense that the two main proteins are either fish or pork. There's a lot of pork-based things in the mountainous regions of Portugal, and definitely different flavor profiles. But also worth noting that the Portuguese, when they were doing business with Japan in the feudal era, brought staple dishes like shrimp tempura and croquet, right? The potato croquet. Those are two dishes that are straight out of the Portuguese and Japanese Nagasaki trade route, and still staples in a lot of Japanese restaurants and households.
Yeah, I live here in Boise, Idaho, and we have one of the largest Basque communities outside of the Basque Country, and croqueta is like super popular here. And again, it was like recently in grad school, I went to a Basque restaurant here, and I was so surprised to see croqueta on the menu because I thought they were Japanese. I've always had it like Japanese izakaya food, so I got a little bit of a tongue lashing from my Basque friends, but it was funny. And I've heard, that's probably why we say pan for bread in Japanese. It's probably from the Portuguese.
Absolutely. And I know, at least from the time that I've spent in Hawaii, with the incredible Creole cooking that they have there, malasadas, like the Portuguese style donuts, oftentimes are filled with an, the red bean paste that we use in all of our Japanese cooking. So, I think it's fun to see these kinds of trends playing out already.
Have you tried like fermenting much?
Not yet. It's one of the things I think, again, it's intimidating from a distance, but once you actually get into the culture of it, it's not that bad. They do sell the shirokoji, the white rice molds, at the Japanese grocery store near me. So we'll see how much longer the quarantine lasts. I might have to start doing that.
I think we should make that a thing. Everyone's working on sourdough, and that's pretty like intensive to get your sourdough starter and to care for it. So I think we should try to get our pilgrimage attendees to be making miso and pickles and everything else, because I think that might even be less work than sourdough.
I'm personally more interested in learning how the Issei made their sake, because I've seen a lot of these films and records showing that there was a serious homebrewing culture among the Issei. So if anyone out there has a recipe, please do share it.
Yeah, that would be a great Yonsei project. Maybe we can get our own label. Okay, people are asking about castella cake. Is that Portuguese origins?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Takumi recommended making natto. Are you a natto fan?
I love natto. And that's funny because a lot of my friends, my family's from Hiroshima. So that's definitely a different culture than up north. And it tends to have, I think, more culturally similarities with the Kansai region. And folks in Kansai don't like natto from my experience. It's mostly like a Tohoku and Kanto thing in Tokyo and the northern regions of Japan. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. Once you get past the smell, I think it's great.
How do you usually eat it? Just with the mustard and rice? Yeah,
it depends. I mean, I've done it with okra before. And if you really like the slime texture, then I mean, this is for hardcore like natto aficionados. But if you just kind of lightly braise the okra and then mix it in with the natto, you get an extra slimy texture. But otherwise, usually with breakfast over some white rice. Occasionally, I've used it as a condiment on leftover pizza.
Oh, I'll have to try that. I like to put the taberu rayu, the crunchy chili garlic oil on pizza or my eggs. I'll put it on anything, but I'll try with the natto. I didn't grow up eating natto, but I went to a really unique undergrad college. It's called Soka University in Southern California. And there's a pretty high population of students from Japan. And so our cafeteria at school always had, giant suihanki of white rice and brown rice, 2 giant stocks of miso soup, and natto every day at breakfast. And so it was just interesting the things that natto turned into. And so I think the most popular dish I saw would be like rice and then scrambled eggs and tater tots and natto and like Tabasco kind of all thrown in there together. And so that's kind of the only way I've eaten natto, but I'll have to try more traditional servings.
Yeah, I should mention, bringing up Japanese breakfast in general, because if you're cooking that Saba Shioyaki recipe, the best part about it is that you have enough left over for breakfast in the morning. Mm. And it, like any fish like that, that's cooked the night before, the flavors soak in overnight, and it's perfect with a nice big bowl of white rice and miso soup.
Yeah, I love Japanese breakfast, but I think to a lot of people, fish for breakfast seems kind of strange, but I'm all for it. There's some chatter happening about the natto. Do you get into sweets at all? Like, I can't get enough mochi, and when I go to Japan, I like any chance I can get, odango is my absolute favorite thing. And I've tried making mochi at home. There's a recipe you can use like your KitchenAid mixer, and it's good. It just doesn't quite have the texture just right. Like you can't really cook with it. Like you can put it in soup, but not to really grill it. The texture just doesn't get there. I do like to bake with mochiko, like I do a matcha mochi cake. But do you do any sweets at all?
I don't bake sweets generally. It's a little too precise for my liking. I like to be able to just, sprinkle on however much feels right. And that doesn't always work well when you need to have a right balance of yeast and other key ingredients for baking. But I do love Japanese sweets, and particularly the not too sweet things like anything that is in anpan, obviously. Mochi manju. One of the best JA recipes that I've had personally, my aunt Seiko makes manju, but baked manju, right? And instead of using like a an or another type of bean, it's lima bean.
Shishito on, right?
Yeah, it's so good.
That would be good. When I was little, that was one of my favorite things, is having friends over and making them eat weird Japanese food. Like umeboshi, I would always make someone eat it just so I could see their face. But I would always have, if I had any like daifuku or mochi on hand, I would always give it out and tell people it was rice and beans, but it's dessert. All right, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you had any interesting mixed foods, just because I know you come from a mixed household as well, and I'm curious if you guys had any fusion dishes that you made at home.
I don't know. I don't think we do any fusion, but it's funny because you'll just eat things and you'll kind of be like, oh, this is actually similar to that dish on that side of the family. This isn't Japanese, but I made shakshuka, and my mom said it was like calabasitas. So I think that happens a lot where different cultures eat essentially the same thing, and it's a staple in different cultures, but just slightly different ways. It looks like Bacon told Julie Abo that his dad made sake at Heart Mountain, so we might be in business with a recipe there.
That's how we community source this programming.
Yeah, this is important community history that we cannot lose. We have a question from Price and Pride. So you mentioned Asian fusion cooking and wondering your thoughts on Japanization of other cuisines like spaghetti.
That's a great question. And I think, the integration of other styles of cooking into the Japanese cuisine is so fascinating. I think especially for those of us whose families have been here for 3 or 4 generations, what we consider to be Japanese food, I think for the most part is like inaka, like countryside cooking, right? And nothing wrong with it. I mean, those great home style cooking. But Japanese cuisine has expanded and continues to diversify, both in the types of dishes that are being created by Japanese chefs with Japanese ingredients, but also among Japanese chefs who are spending time abroad and bringing back what they learned with them. I've also attributed this to this idea of like ishokenme, like the idea of devoting one's entire body and spirit to a singular task. This idea, I think, lends itself well to cooking for the chefs who have spent their lives, maybe 10 years working in a kitchen in France or Italy or elsewhere, and then coming back to Japan to open a restaurant of that cuisine. Of course, you do find chefs who have spent less time abroad, or in some cases, perhaps not at all. But for the most part, I think when you find the really good restaurants of other cuisines in Japan, it tends to be that that case of people who've spent quite a bit of time overseas. So some of the best pasta that I've had, and I go to Italy regularly because my wife's grandmother lives in Florence. Of course, you'll never beat Italian pasta in Italy, but fresh made pasta in Tokyo is a close second at some of the Italian restaurants that I've been to there. Obviously, there are fusion dishes that are maybe less appealing, but you know, I'm not a big fan of the cocktail weenies in spaghetti, which tends to be done and sometimes at the diner style restaurants. But if you go to a real Italian restaurant in Japan, then you'd be surprised at how good it is.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of like the mentaiko pasta. And I know that's pretty big, but I don't know, to me, like I love fish eggs, but to me it doesn't go with noodles. Okay, we have a question from Thomas. While you were in Japan, did you use yamaimo in your cooking?
I love yamaimo, but I have not used it in my cooking. And it's definitely an ingredient that I'd like to learn more about. And again, like okra or natto, depending on how you prepare it, it does get that sort of slimy texture. Now, of course, I use konnyaku when I do like a nabe dish, and that is also made out of yamaimo. So slightly different texture. You don't have the slime really to that extent. But certainly in the winter, love doing a good nabe with root vegetables of all different kinds. And, you know, that's a good opportunity then to do some of this kind of fusion with whatever local vegetables that you have. But ideally, if you can also bring in some key Japanese ingredients like the shiitake mushrooms and the konnyaku.
What are your holiday traditions in your family? Like we always do crab at Christmas dinner instead of a ham.
We don't have just one. I mean, I think when we can get the whole family together, then we've done the oshogatsu, like of course the ozone, right? We want to do that kind of the good luck soup, but it's not necessarily one dish ever. And I think that's the beauty of Japanese American cooking. You know, you might have like a tray of futomaki, like sushi rolls, but then you're serving it with like a roasted turkey. But of course, that white rice that is next to that has to have some gravy on it in the truest of Japanese American.
I don't think I've gone that far yet.
Yeah, white rice with gravy. I think that is one of the most classic JA dishes that you can imagine. And from what I understand, a lot of the post-war Nisei cafes around the country, white rice and gravy was on the menu as a side dish.
It's like loco moco without all the fixins.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that you guys have a lot of those recipes documented. I think that's rare that people are able to do that. And I know in my family on the Mexican side, something that we all treasure is, you know, a family cookbook, and a lot of them are my great-grandmother's, and it's things that, you know, she didn't write down, but it was people kind of crowdsourcing what information had been passed on to them. And so I think that's really special to have that information on hand if you can.
And it makes you think now, it's like, as we continue to do these cooking projects in our own generation, you know, what are the things that we do that we're taking for granted? I've never written down a recipe before, and I've been cooking for 15 years. And, you know, it kind of takes something like this to really make you think about what it is to record a recipe, and not just for your own family, but for many other people that might enjoy that food.
Yeah. How are you into ramen at all? Like, I love ramen, and you know, it's fun seeing people understand now what we mean by really enjoying true ramen and not just the instant variety.
Yeah, I ate ramen probably 2 times a week when I was living in Japan, sometimes more, depending on what my budget was like. But, you know, I have a couple places that I stand by here in Philadelphia, Tanikawa ramen in particular, which is in Chinatown. Really good, like Kagoshima, like pork bone broth. I love their miso broth that they do with the pork bone stock. And I do that stuff at home occasionally. I mean, but again, it's kind of like, you know, if you can go out and buy a $10 bowl of incredible ramen somewhere else, is it really worth like 5 hours to make your own stock from the pork bones?
I love tonkotsu ramen too, and I just don't think I've got it in me to really sit and wait for that broth to develop. Although I may have to see if that's a possibility with the Instant Pot. Carrie Kababa says, camp-related food, anyone? Wieners and sauerkraut, chipped beef on toast, etc. And that's a great point, Carrie. And actually, for next week's Sunday supper, stay tuned for that, because we will be looking at some camp foods and actually going into detail with a Weenies Royale recipe. So keep tuned for next week. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Rob. We will be sure to roll out your other videos in the future. So thanks for showing us how easy it can be to have good home style Japanese food.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see you next time.